מתחילות. Okay. Hello, Joanna, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
I'm so happy to see you again. Thank
you
you for taking the time from your busy schedule to speak with me. I think that what you're doing is so important, and we got such wonderful reaction after the first podcast, and everybody are interested in what you're doing, and friends are asking me, can you introduce us to her? And
really? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Listen, you're a real leader. I told you what I'm thinking about you. So it's not a secret that I admire you and your work. So there we go. So for the people who don't know who you are, I don't want to go to all but I want to concentrate on the fact that you it was what, 12 years ago?
2009, so
wow.
13, yeah.
You
actually exactly around this time, 13 years ago,
So you had an epiphany, if I may say. I'll just say, this is Joanna Landau, and she's the CEO, and she's the founder and CEO of Vibe Israel, as you see, and she's gonna take us now through her journey, and more than that, what she's doing right now. So 13 years ago, you had an epiphany around this time, and what happened?
I just basically felt that there's a way to tell Israel's story to the world, especially young people, that isn't focused on the politics or the religion or the things that everybody was always talking about, and was mainly focused on what Israel does best. Kind of connects very much, of course, to your podcast and what you focus on. But basically that there's a way to share Israel's story, focusing on our strengths rather than perhaps one would argue our weaknesses, and that there's a whole industry which actually does that, called country and nation branding, and every other country does it, but Israel not so much. And so I decided that I wanted to implement that in Israel. It wasn't my idea. It was a project that started in the foreign ministry, but in any other country that it worked well in, there was always sort of buy-in from the non-governmental sector, from the people. And so I established Vibe Israel as a sort of external organization that comes from the citizens, so it comes from the people, but says, yes, I believe that this is Israel's story, and this is the story that we should be telling the world. And we decided to go ahead and start telling it in all sorts of weird, wonderful ways.
Sorry, you're too modest, so I'm sorry. I'm taking a step, back, and I want to share with the audience that you had a very successful business.
Okay.
And you made the decision to close it, meaning there was some personal, I wouldn't say sacrifice, but definitely giving up on some. If you created one who created is her own business as well. It's something that you cherish, and you put a lot of energy, and it's important for you. So I think it's unusual that you're making a decision to close a private business, which you're highly successful in, and to do something for your country and for your nation and for your people.
It's thank you. It was a result of doing some coaching that started actually as business coaching for my business, and then very quickly transitioned into life coaching for myself, because I was more interested in kind of understanding what it is that I was looking for long term. And I was a young mother of 3 very young children, and we were talking in Hebrew, the coach and I, but when you do life coaching, then you're kind of asked, what is it that you want to sort of dedicate your life to, and what do you really feel very, very strongly about? And in Hebrew, the word is yi'ud, but in English, the word is calling, in the sense that something is calling you, and that it's stronger than you. And if it pops up and surfaces, once it's out there, and you see it there, and you feel that you're able to sort of go after it, and you feel strongly about it, then it calls you. And I have to say, almost 15 years later, that doesn't matter whether I'm fed up with what's going on right now, or that I feel that I could be doing better, or that there are things that are out of my control, I find myself unable to move away from this field that I decided to focus on. And for me, it was about the future of my my children and their choices in Israel, and also about how, because I'm originally from England, then how the Jewish people outside of Israel are being affected by Israel's image, and this sense that I didn't understand why what I saw about Israel was primarily positive, even though I could recognize that there were negatives. And yet what the world was saying was primarily negative, and didn't even know most of the positive things. And that just didn't make sense to me. It felt to me that the problem was in the methodology and not so much, it's media bias or it's something else that's stopping us. So I just felt it was stronger than me, and I guess it still is.
That's it. And may I ask, how was the reaction? I mean, your clients, you're telling them you're busy, you're closing the business in order to do something for Israel, and I'm wondering, and there was nothing yet, nothing existed yet. You had the vision and the passion and the calling, and you're giving out of something which,
I don't think it surprised anyone. I think that no, just because I've always been on this dual relationship between being Israeli, but also being originally from outside of Israel, and that connection and that sort of care and the ability to see Israel from the outside in and not just from the inside out has always been part of who I am. My husband is also very similar. He's American Israeli or Israeli American. I think for people like that, it doesn't usually surprise anyone if they decide that they want to dedicate themselves to something that's, about the country and not so much just about themselves.
But so you get up in the morning, you say, I want to do something for Israel. I want to improve the image or the perception of Israel. What do you do next? I mean,
what I actually did was I phoned my grandmother, who had a lot of connections that I never tapped into because I didn't feel it was right. And but at this point, because I was so passionate about it, I was like, Grandma, you know people, introduce me to someone. And she had just actually met someone in the Foreign Office who told her about this project. And the project was called the Brand Israel Project. And I had just completed a master's degree and an MBA with a focus on marketing and branding. And she said, you like branding, you care about Israel, maybe there's some kind of connection. And she basically invited him for lunch, and we went out for lunch together. His name is Ido Aharoni. He was the Consul General of Israel in New York, but this was before then. And I think I mentioned it last time as well. And we went out for lunch, and he started talking about Israel in terms that I had not heard before. Usually when you think about how do you tell Israel's story or improve Israel's image, the focus is on issues relating to the conflict. How do we explain it better? How do we get people to understand and contextualize what we're dealing with here, so that we're not seen to be, Goliath, and there's this new David in town. And he wasn't talking about that at all. He was talking about the spirit of the Israeli people, about the strength of the Israeli tech. The book Startup Nation just came out, and the beauty of the country and all these different things that kind of made me realize why I live here to begin with. Wow. And so it was very, it connected very much to things that I was feeling very strongly about around that time. As I mentioned, I was doing life coaching. And so I said, you had me at hello. What does one do to join this amazing project that you're setting up? And so he invested a lot of energy and time in me. Apparently, a lot of people had said to him, I'm very interested, what can I do? And then he would send them away and give them some kind of project to do and then come back. And then usually 98% would not come back, because it's nice to say I'm interested, but in the end, if you're not really, then if you don't want to do the work, you just don't do it.
Yeah.
And I came back with like a laminated report of like 12 ideas for the 12 tribes of Israel of how to market and brand Israel to the world. And I don't think he ever read it. I don't think I ever did again, but I think it was very clear that I was very passionate about it. And so for about 8 months, I shadowed him. I went with him to meetings. He was very kind and sort of allowed me to join him to meetings that he was going to. So a lot of meetings within, government circles, and then meetings outside of government circles, because he quickly understood that it might not take off within the government, and that business and other types of culture, these are all industries that can take part in telling Israel's story. And I was mainly in charge of putting together groups of people from outside of the government who would come because I invited them, and then hear what Ido had to say and hear about this new methodology, and then hopefully get on board with it. And because I tend to do things, I don't know, I just go all in. So I established an organization and had a name and everything before I even knew what the hell we were going to do.
Wow.
Do with it. Yeah, I was so excited about it that we went.
How long did it take you to create the?
Probably it took about, I don't remember exactly, probably about 6 months.
Wow.
Something like that. Yeah, we did, I did a proper process of branding and, coming up with a name and so on. It wasn't originally Vibe Israel, it was a different name. And we changed it over time. But basically alongside shadowing Ido, I also got together people and did some brainstormings of just people who cared and seemed to know more than I did about various ways of communicating a story, whether it's on digital or through events or in a ton of different ways. And people came up with ideas, and eventually one of the ideas took over, and we went ahead with it.
That's brilliant. So why Vibe? I mean,
why Vibe Israel? Yeah. Well, originally we had a different name, and Vibe
I remember it was kinetic or
kinetis. Yeah, it was about combining the term kinetic energy and Israel. So kinetic energy is when you have momentum that comes from movement and mass. And the idea was to get more and more people on board and to create like a movement of people who care about Israel and so on. But with hindsight, the word kinetis sounds a bit like I don't know, like a viral disease or something. I don't know. It doesn't sound like what it was, and it was a difficult word to actually.
It's complicated.
It's not a nice word.
Yeah.
So actually, we did some. One of the groups that I don't remember who it was, but one of the groups that I was consulting with, and the people that I was consulting with, they had their own sort of branding people, and they said, we'll come up with a name. And they came up with Vibe Israel, and the idea was mainly that what we're trying to convey is the vibe of the country, and to when a lot of Israel's story was about facts and figures and information that was being provided. What are our policies? Why are they justified? Here's the information, and so on and so forth. Whereas storytelling is about creating a visual reality in one's mind. And that very much has to do with the atmosphere of the place and the energy and the vibe. So we liked the word vibe because it was also kind of with movement and energy, and we felt it was relevant. And I decided actively to include the name Israel in the name of the organization. It was a sense of not fearing to put Israel in the name, because we were going through a stage where people were trying to downplay the name Israel because of the concern about the negative narrative and so on. And I insisted on keeping it in the name of the organization. And it stuck to this day.
Joanna, I must tell you, you're such a source of inspiration. I must tell you, it's a little bit for one second person. I want to create, a futures research organization. And I've been consulting with some friends, and it says, no, go. It should be an international one. And I was last week, and I was speaking with some very, very close friends and people that I trust. And it says, no, it should be because it's futures. And I went home and I says, no, but I'm an Israeli, I'm proud. No. And I'm listening to you, and I just made the decision. It's going to have Israel in the name. That's it.
I think if it's reflective of Israel's spirit and takes and leverages what we're best at, and we're really good at certain things that differentiate us from other countries, then yes, relating it to Israel and saying it's very deeply entrenched in in who we are and what we're all about, and this is the kind of consulting that you're going to get. The added value is that it's coming from an Israeli. It's like, you know, we associate Germans with being very, very pedantic and very organized. And, you know, we associate the French with being, you know, and then the Italian. So if people, and certainly in your field of innovation and so on, Israel is certainly a country that has this can-do attitude and these, you know, thinking out of the box and this ability to dream the impossible and to actually implement as well, not perfectly, because we're not German, but it'll get done. I think that those are the biggest strengths of Israel, and I'm actually part of my work is to try and get Israeli companies to highlight their Israeliness, because when Israel's story is told well, and through the high tech it is told well, people do appreciate Israel's high tech. It bypasses everything else. It also even bypasses most of, and almost like 98% or 99% of the anti-Israel narrative. Can't say the same for many other aspects of Israel, but certainly business, innovation. We have a, you know, there's Silicon Valley and there's Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley is the Middle Eastern version of Silicon Valley. And there are a lot of similarities.
You know, they're talking about the unicorns, right? And also about the camel. It's like two different, so you have the unicorns, but you have the camel startup. So there we go. So please stay. So you have this, you have already created the organization. What is the strategy? Why did you choose it? Okay, and then how you implement it. So
there was already a brand book for Israel that the foreign ministry had published, hadn't circulated widely. But this book basically was a blueprint for what needed to be done. And it was very professionally done. They used the company from England. So clearly I had this immediate affinity for it. And I read the book and I started reading all about country branding and nation branding. And I looked at other countries and what they did. 10 or 15 years ago, it was very early days for this industry. Today, almost every country is doing it. But 10, 15 years ago, there were very few best practices. It wasn't clear what needed to be done. So each country sort of invented it as it went along. But I had this kind of blueprint and it was great. But the problem was that I was a nonprofit, non-governmental. I didn't have the government behind me. I didn't have the mandate to sort of share Israel's story and own Israel as a brand. And yet at the same time, the government was also not really implementing it as quickly and as efficiently as I had sort of expected. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what do we do? I've got this blueprint, but I can't really implement it at the level that the government wanted to do. Meanwhile, the government is doing stuff, but not enough. So as I mentioned, I brought some people around the table. I used to sort of order sushi and beer and people would come over and we'd talk. And we start, the question that I was saying was sort of, I was asking is, we know this is the story, here's the book, like, you know, we've got the messaging that was done in a very professional way, so I trust it. But I don't know what I can do as a small organization to promote this story to the world. And some ideas came up. Most of the people around the table were in their 30s and 40s. So not kind of too wed to the old ways and traditional ways of sort of advocating for Israel. A lot of them were in the tech community and digital and so on. And we started a conversation one day, and it was mainly about, well, you know, bringing people to Israel is always the best way to get them to see what the country is about. Like, you don't need to even say anything. You bring someone to Israel and they see it. They see that it's a country that has a huge amount of diversity. They feel the energy in the air, the tradition, the culture. It's all there, right? So bringing people to Israel is the best way. And of course, the most well-known program that does that is Birthright, the Glit, which is, for people who don't know. Can I just
ask you, because Birthright is stealing, I'm sorry that I interrupted you. I'm sorry, you wanted to.
No, I just wanted to say, if people don't know what Birthright is.
Yeah, please do.
It's basically the biggest educational travel organization in the world. Basically, it brings around 50,000, if not more, young Jewish people from around the world to Israel on a 10-day educational trip, with the purpose being of connecting the diaspora to their country. And there are many diasporas around the world, Birthright is the biggest educational travel company. So it sounds like it's not really a travel company, it's really an educational organization. And they do an incredible job, but their focus is young Jewish people. And I was focusing on the non-Jewish world. So there was this issue there.
So first of all, I want to ask you, why did you choose that? But the second thing I want to challenge, because let's assume I love traveling, okay? But, traveling takes a lot of energy. You need to take time off your work. You need to settle, if you're married, you have children, young children. So it's a hustle. It doesn't matter why why choosing this, which is in many senses, it's the hardest way. It's not.
Because that was just the beginning of the conversation. That was my pushback as well.
Oh,
so
really?
I said, we have two problems with Birthright. And by the way, I'm on the education committee of Birthright. I wasn't then, but I am now. And it's a wonderful program. But there were two issues that were irrelevant for us, and therefore we couldn't do something similar. One was that it was aimed at Jews, and there is a natural connection for Jews with Israel, and therefore there's a desire maybe to come, right? But if you're not Jewish and you have no connection to Israel, why would you come on a trip to Israel? Because, as you mentioned, that's the second issue, there are a lot of obstacles to taking time off, the cost associated with it, and so on. I didn't have the ability to invest the amount that Birthright invests in offering these trips practically for free. And so it was irrelevant for us to do what Birthright was doing. But we were—
Why did you focus on the non-Jewish?
Because I felt that if you get somebody non-Jewish to think that Israel and to view Israel positively, then that will, by definition, impact a Jewish person. If a Jewish person sees somebody non-Jewish who has no reason to like Israel or love Israel, other than the fact that Israel truly offers something positive, then they'll be impressed. But the other way around doesn't necessarily work.
Wow.
So if you've got Mayim
how did you get that? I mean, this is a wonderful insight. How did you get to this?
I think it had to do with the fact that I went to boarding school in England, which was a Jewish boarding school when I was in high school. And then after the army, I went back to study law at Cambridge, and I was practically the only Jew that a lot of the people knew. And in the end, when I got married, when I came back after the end of my degree, 6 or 7 of my friends, from non-Jewish friends, came to my wedding, and it was the first time they ever visited Israel. And you could see that when somebody who has, like, if I now go on a trip to Iceland and I come back and I say, wow, Iceland's amazing, you've got to, take a look, here's a video of something, as opposed to an Icelandic person saying it, clearly my message is gonna hone deeper, right? Because I have nothing to gain from promoting or saying good things about Iceland. I don't live there, it's not my interest. Whereas a Jewish person has obviously an affinity to begin with. And so it's kind of, when you have really top Jewish people saying amazing things about Israel, by definition, it's taken with a little bit of like, well, you're not objective. But if somebody non-Jewish says something good about Israel, then they are objective, and that impacts everybody.
No, I'm just thinking about this fact that you said there was a calling, and it seems that the seeds of the calling were already implanted, because if you are married, you're a newlywed, you're with your honeymoon, and you're thinking about what your friends are saying. It's some ingrained.
I think when you find your calling, you realize that everything you did in your life has led you to the calling. And I did very varied things, and some things had nothing to do with what I do today. And then suddenly something comes up with what I'm doing today, and I'm like, wow, that's something that I did, when I was 15, or something that I did when I was 22, or whatever, and it's somehow all connected. But yeah, it was probably something that was always in there. It just took time to come out for me. But yeah, so we basically said, okay, bringing people to Israel is the best way to improve perceptions of the country. We are interested in the non-Jewish world because we believe that if we get that, first of all, there are also many more non-Jews than there are Jews. And therefore, if we can get the non-Jews to be supportive of Israel, then the Jews will, if you build it, they will come. If we get just Jews to be supportive of Israel, it's nice and it's great and it's good for Jewish peoplehood, but every Jew has a non-Jewish friend, and in the end, it's not enough. We can't do this alone. We can't rely only, the Jews represent a minor fraction of the world. It's not enough. And so we understood that we needed to somehow become relevant for non-Jews to want to come to Israel on a trip. We understood that we would have to pay for it, which meant that the trips had to be very, very small. So we didn't really understand who is the person, the profile of the person who has a very loud voice and would be willing to come to Israel to experience it for themselves. Why would they come? And somebody at the time around the table was doing something in the field, the early field of influencers. And they threw out the idea of, why don't you bring, I think they said bloggers. It was 2010, something like that.
Wow.
And I said, what's that? Because I didn't know. I didn't even join Facebook until 2011. And they explained to me, these are people who have an interest. And at the time, these were people who were not doing this as a job. It was their side job, right? And it's like an online diary, a journal. And they write about things that maybe Israel has something interesting to add to their knowledge. And then, you know, their audiences, they're followed by, at the time, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Maybe it'll be interesting and we can create stories through that. And so we were like, oh, it's a very interesting idea. So I went onto Google and I said, you know, top 50, I don't know, food bloggers, because we know Israel has great food. Yeah. And I see this list of people who are just random people I've never come across, never known, never. This was at a time when blogging was just becoming popular. There wasn't, social media was just at the very early stages. We didn't even have smartphones, most of us, or we didn't have streaming on smartphones and stuff like that. So it was very, very early days. And we understood that basically what we could do was take a group of, say, 5 or 6 of these bloggers from all over the world and invite them and pay for their trip and get them to come to Israel. Why would they come? Because it's a free trip. Why not? Didn't seem like rocket science to us. And there's a win-win, which I'm always looking for. So I'm looking for a distribution platform to tell Israel's story. They are looking for really great and interesting and unique content. So Israel is the kind of country that you wouldn't ordinarily just happen to come to. So if you're British and you live in London, you could hop on the Eurostar and you'd be in Paris and you'll write something about Paris. But you wouldn't hop on anything and turn up in Israel anytime soon, unless you were invited. And so that's what we decided to do. We thought, okay, let's do a trip, which is similar to Birthright. Birthright was 10 days. That was too long. We figured 7 days. Not too expensive for us to actually, you know, make it happen. And I decided that I'm putting down the initial cost just to check. It was like a pilot, just to check to see. And I decided I'm going to do everything absolutely opposite to the way everything had been done before. Just because it felt like...
Wow. Tell us, please. That sounds interesting.
To Israel 10, 15 years ago, and unfortunately, to this day, are really quite similar in the sense that it's majorly focusing on the Holy Land, a visit to the religious areas, a discussion about, you know, how small we are, and here are the borders, and there's the Hezbollah, and there's Gaza, and, you know, here's what we're doing to protect ourselves, and all sorts of things like that. Maybe a night in Tel Aviv, you know, just to like give a little bit of shake it up a bit, but mostly Jerusalem, you know, religious sites, the desert, that kind of thing. And I felt that was could be interesting, but it really depended on the people that we would bring. And we understood,
bringing foodies, what are they going to do in the Kotel?
So first of all, we understood that the group has to be homogenous. The topic was not Israel, because if we made it about Israel, because they're not Jewish, we assumed they wouldn't be necessarily that interested. But if we made it about food or design, or in the end, the first trip was mummy bloggers, so women who are writing about the experience of being mothers.
Really? You're going to tell me how we got there? Okay, interesting. Okay.
And we understood that if we invite them, we say, okay, we're inviting 5 mummy bloggers to come to Israel and learn what Israel does in the field of child rearing and parenthood and so on, so that you'll have interesting content for your blogs. Then we figured that might be interesting. And we did mummy bloggers because myself and the woman who was with me, who I had hired for this, we were both young mothers. It seemed like we knew what we were doing with our own kids. And we wanted it to be very, very informal. So not what a government would do, not what a tourism board would do, not the usual stuff. Like we wanted it to be very people to people, because by definition, it felt to me that when you bypass all the formalities, especially in a country like Israel, you get to the real gems, right? The fun people, the interesting people, the ones who may not be the top, but they're the most interesting and fun to spend an afternoon, on the beach when the sun is going down with hummus and some beer. Like that was the concept of the trip.
Wow.
And the idea was, and the instruction to the tour manager that I had hired was, imagine you're bringing 5 of your best friends. You know what they're interested in, you know what Israel has to offer, and we're just facilitating a match between those 2 experiences.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so that was
When was it? It was
2011, June 2011 was our first trip. We sent
where they were from, Joanna, where they were
from. Because I was funding it and I didn't have huge amounts, so we limited ourselves. We were most interested in areas where we felt that Israel had some controversial issue with its brand. So primarily Western democracies, North America, Western Europe, Australia, South Africa, those kinds of, a little bit of South America, not so much the Far East, which was becoming very interested in Israel because of the book Startup Nation, because the brand of the Jew in the Far East was very positive. And so I didn't feel there was as much work to do there. Not so much Russia, because there were 1.5 million Russians going back and forth between Israel and Russia, and therefore there was a lot more familiarity. Not Arab countries, because at the time there was no connection with Arab countries, and not Africa, because mainly they were not as impactful on a global scale. Same with Eastern Europe. So at the time it was Europe, kind of the more Western countries, and too expensive for the flights from America. So we figured we'll send invitations. We Googled top 50 mummy bloggers in England, Spain, and France, I think it was. And we got a list, and we sent out an invitation that says, to their email. And we just said, hi, we'd like to invite you for a free trip to come to Israel and learn about what we do with kids and how we parent. And yeah, it was very scary, to be honest. The first time we sent it out, because if you're not Jewish, then obviously you don't necessarily have this experience, but as Jewish people and Israelis, the concern is that the world is very much does not think positive things about Israel. And so we were concerned that we would get big backlash and people would say, no, we're not coming to Israel because of what you're doing with the Palestinians and all that. And we were very pleasantly surprised that most people, I think everyone, was like, sure, I'll come. It was.
Oh, so now you had another problem. Now you have 15. And
yeah, well, what we did was we had like a wish list. And so we could choose the ones that we wanted most. And we invited 5 of them. The 2 or 3 of them were from the UK, and 2 of them were from Spain. They had a total following, which was it sounds minuscule, but under 100,000 followers for all 5 of them, which is nothing in today's terms.
Yeah.
And that was just on their blogs, right? But it was a pilot, and we were like, cool, let's do it. So we put together an itinerary, which seems to us to be interesting, because it's what we do with our kids every day. And we were specifically, of course, we took the brand book, we had the messaging, and we tried to follow the messaging, which was very much about the entrepreneurial zeal of the Israeli tech community. So we had a startup session, and it was about the diversity of the Israeli people. So we included all types of Israelis from all walks of life and religions and so on. We included a very strong element that had to do with the Jewish value of tikkun olam, making the world a better place. Yeah. So it was very much about showing social entrepreneurship as well as tech and things like that. So we had the messaging, and all we did was we looked for the right storytellers and the right experiences. And we very much focused it on something that would visually be very appealing, because we knew they were coming and taking pictures. And that was our first trip.
Wow.
And it was.
But you thought about everything, even thinking about the visual that they will take pictures. I wouldn't have thought about that. Wow.
It's fortunately for me, or unfortunately, I don't know, but as I said, when I do things, I tend to go all in, and I get very much the details. So this is why I knew when I said to my life coach, I'm a passionate person, but I don't know what I'm passionate about. And that's how I reached sort of this topic. I knew that if I was planning my 30th birthday party, I go to great detail. And I do that because I know that from my mother and from my grandmother. And I know that when you put a lot of thought, it's not money, it's thought, into an experience, then you cover all the bases and you keep on creating what are known as sort of moments of delight, where like you're not expecting it, but then you get a handwritten letter, and you're not expecting it, and then something's waiting for you, or the person that you meet somehow is connected to you in a more unique way than you would have expected. It really just requires thought and effort. It is not necessarily a money thing. And we did the trip.
Most innovation are not.
Yeah. We did the trip, and what it was basically all of the data that Ido had presented to me, showing me that contrary to what most people in the community and in the Israeli government thought, most people actually don't know anything about Israel and are not negative about it. They may be hearing some negative noise, but they're not necessarily negative about Israel. And they're open to be interested as long as we have something interesting to say. And that's exactly what happened. So we took them on experiences of Israel that no travel company would consider, including in a 7-day trip to Israel. But it was very interesting and on topic for this particular group. As an example, we took them to the city of Holon, which is out on the outskirts of Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And we took them there because at the time it was branded as the city of children. And we took them on the first thing they did after they got off the plane was we took them on a tour of the various children's parks, because they were very unique, because they were all based off of famous children's stories. And so it was just an interesting idea that didn't exist in other places. And of course, it was very unique for these bloggers to come across. And then they met with the mayor, or not the mayor of Holon, but the executive director of the city, who was responsible for this shift. And she showed them an image of Holon 100 years ago, which was just sand dunes. And now what it was at the time.
Beautiful city, yeah.
And you're talking about women from England and Spain who had hundreds of years of history and heritage, and in the space of 100 years could not imagine how you could turn a desert into a thriving first world country. So it was a very exciting week, and it proved to me that there's value here, and that's when it took off. And really what it was about showing the vibe of the country. And we actually had a very nice kind of slogan, which was meet the people, feel the energy, share the experience. That's what it was. And we learned a lot from the first trip. We, of course, did survey before, survey after. We learned all sorts of things that we needed to improve. And we've been doing it for 10 years. And every time we improved the quality of the tour. So it remained a tour for a small group of global influencers. Over the years, they became more and more impactful. So, we had trips where 15 million people were followers of these 5 people. Yeah. And
so it's always 5 people, always bloggers on a certain topic?
So it's not bloggers anymore, because bloggers, by definition today, the way social media is taken over is that you are an influencer. It's called digital influencer. You may have a blog, but you promote the blog through your social media. So your social media needs to be very active, and then you refer to your blog. So your main sort of source of distributing your content is through social media, rather than expecting people to sign up to your blog and then get a notice that there's a new blog post and so on. Information comes to you as opposed to you seeking out information. So we will prefer to bring influencers that have blogs as well, or YouTube pages, or podcasts, or anything that is what we call evergreen, in the sense that it stays online for years after it's been posted. Because what we're looking for is that today, even if you Google Israel, travel to Israel, one of the top results will be a blog post of 17 things you have to know before you travel to Israel by one of our travel bloggers that was in Israel in 2017.
Wow.
Because it kind of, you know, and he updates it every year. He came back several times afterwards. So yeah, that's mainly who we brought. During COVID, we had to stop, obviously. And now, literally right now, I'm working on bringing back the tours. But the difference is that I want to be more impactful than we were then. At the time we got to, in 2019, we did about 6 or 7 tours a year. And 2020, we were slated to do 8 tours. But of course, we were unable to. We did only 2, and then COVID took over. And I feel that it's a wonderful project. But if you don't do a minimum of 20 tours a year, then you won't move the needle. It'll remain in the sort of.
Please explain, how did you get to this conclusion? I mean, this is a very, I mean, because it seems that you're looking at your work and you're taking a critique way.
Yeah, no, I take.
No, I'm saying it's
honestly,
very unusual. You know, people usually fall in love with what you do, and you're asking yourself, what should be better?
Well, I have to say, and I said this to one of our donors a few weeks ago when I decided that this is what I wanted to do. I said, you know, you've been asking me to do more tours every year for several years now. They've been supporting us since 2013. And at some point, I felt that, okay, around 8 tours a year is the maximum that we can do without sacrificing the quality of the tour. Because the more tours you do, the more expensive it becomes. At some point, it's not cost effective, and then you have to sacrifice some of the quality of the tour. And I refused to do that. And I was like, no. And it's not the only way that we can improve Israel's image. Digital allows us to do campaigns and work with, you know, other kinds of influencers and so on. This particular donor said, I like the tours. You know, we'll give you more money, do more tours. And I'm like, no, I was in love with my own sort of passion project. And COVID made me understand, looking with hindsight, that while it was an amazing project and still is, if I really want to move the needle, we have to get to critical mass. You know, it's like if there was Birthright and they didn't bring 50,000 a year, they brought 5,000 a year. It would be wonderful, but it wouldn't create the ripple effect that it's created over the years. So when I look at the trips that we do, I don't look at the number of tours. I look at the amount of people that we want to reach. And I feel that Israel on digital, by definition, needs to reach dozens of millions. So we're talking about 20, 30, 40 million people a year on digital, which sounds like a big number, but it's not really, because digital is always in exponential numbers. We need to reach that many people to see a shift in perceptions. And therefore, to get to that point, we need to do at least 20 tours. That was sort of the calculation that we got to. So now I'm sort of saying, okay, we'll do more tours, and we'll go up to 8 participants per tour. That's the maximum that I'm willing to go up to without paying a price.
Okay, so you're saying about, okay, so you're talking about it will be 20, but with 8 people. This is what you're saying. Okay, and it's going to be diverse. I mean, different kind of different.
So these are things that we were looking at as, you know, in the last 10 years, social media has really like gone crazy, and digital influencers are the thing. But now there are new platforms. We didn't do TikTok before now, and now we won't be able to avoid doing TikTok influencers as well. So and you have to adapt yourself to each type of platform. Today there's a lot of video. In the past there wasn't a lot of video. It was easier, and so on. So what we understood is that we need to look at sort of how are we going to create the biggest impact that we can, and we want to make sure that yes, we're bringing 8 people per tour. In the first year, do 10 tours a year, and then by the second year, get up to 20 tours, and then 20 tours every year. And then another thing that we noticed is that in the past, when we were doing 7 or 8 tours, every tour was on a different topic. And in 2019, because the Israeli food industry became very popular globally, I don't mean food tech, I mean Israeli food. just took over the world. Everybody loves hummus, everybody loves sabich, that's the thing. Restaurants opening and so on. All of our tours were about food because we felt that we wanted to push a successful, and so we understood that if we're going to do 10 tours a year, what we're going to do is we're going to see what topics are trending online amongst the audiences that we're interested in impacting, so mainly young people. And within those topics, what is Israel particularly good at and has a really interesting story to tell about? And focus on, and then focus on 3 topics per year, so we can do at least 3 tours on one topic. So we can also start repeating experiences, and that way bring some of the costs down. And then I'm leaving one tour as like a joker, one that's sort of a...
do you want to share what are the topics for this year?
We don't know yet, because once
you don't know. Okay.
I have to raise the funds for it.
Wow.
Once we raise the funds for it, I start building the team back again. The team needs to start searching for the topics and so on. I assume it's going to be very much, probably one of them is going to be travel, because Israel's still remembered for the positive handling of COVID, and people really want to come here, and the tourism ministry did a lot of work in that sense. So probably travel, something probably relating to food, I'm not entirely sure, and probably something relating to wellness, connecting and of course connecting our technology to all 3 of those topics. That's probably the areas that we're going to look at. And the one joker is one that I always keep, because we did in 2016 or 17, I don't remember. We did a tour, which was also a campaign, which was completely crazy. We basically, I got a bit bored, to be honest. And I went to a creative company and I said, we paid them to give us, ideas for a different kind of tour that was also a campaign. And we said it has to include people coming to Israel, and it has to use the power of social media to create a big splash. And one of the ideas that they gave us was to bring dog influencers to Israel.
Yeah, I love it.
Bizarre. But basically, if you follow social media well enough, you know that if you post an image of a pet, then that increases the amount of people who are interested in that particular image or story or video. And there are dog influencers on Instagram and TikTok and so on who have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of followers. So it's not the actual person, it's the dog that actually has the platform. And so they came up with this idea called Doggy Vacay in Israel. And we did a campaign where we invited dogs on International Dog Day to sign up to participating in a competition for a free trip, dog plus one, meaning their owner and the dog, to come to Israel for a free trip. Why? Because Tel Aviv has the highest dogs per capita in the world. We had to make that connection, otherwise it's not authentic. And of course, hundreds of dogs signed up. We chose the ones that had the most following. We also reached out to a lot of them. And in the end, we brought 6 dogs and did a whole campaign about it. It ended up on the national news. We ended up with we tracked everything, and we had 700 million impressions about this.
I love it.
So I'm keeping one to like I call it a joker, because you never know.
No, it's okay. I'm just telling you that I'm into technology, so I'm just telling you that I think there are a lot of influencers, mainly on Twitter, regarding Web3 and blockchain. So I think I think we have very good. And another issue that is very important for Gen Z and the millennium, I'm working on it, is mental health.
Mental health. Yeah, definitely. And that relates back to COVID. And that's how we would bring it into, we have to, the tour topic has to be something uplifting, exciting, fun, because we're trying to reach a lot of people.
Yeah.
So we would focus, or we would call it wellness or something like that. Yeah. And there would be a focus, for example, on mental health. Yeah. But I'll give you an example of how we understood why we need to frame it in this way. So one of the things that Israel does extremely well is medical breakthroughs. We're very good at, lots of doctors in Israel, lots of research. And so we wanted to do a trip for doctors. And we sent out, and the same, by the way, we wanted to do a trip about fintech, finance. And in this field, a lot of the influencers are actually Jewish. Doctors and finance people. And a lot of them didn't want to come because they knew, they was like, it's Israel,
Okay.
not that interested.
Interesting.
And we felt that it was also when we started reading the blogs and we started reading the content, it was a little bit dry. Okay, you need to be at the same level of technical understanding to be able to follow it, which means that the audience is small.
No. Yeah, I'm just telling you, you should look at the digital fashion right now.
What we did, so we looked at doctors and medical, and then we thought, okay, what is adjacent to medical but is broader? We ended up with health. Health is connected to medical, and then what is adjacent to health that is a word and a concept and a industry that is very relevant for millennials and Gen Z, and that's wellness. So we ended up doing wellness tours where we included medical breakthroughs and research and whatever, but the topic was wellness. So for example, we would do, fashion and tech, food security, for example, is huge, but you wouldn't call it necessarily food security, you would call it social entrepreneurship. And then have a big focus on that.
That's beautiful. Really, I mean, the branding. I want to share with the audience, you're so humble. I saw a film, you were in Abu Dhabi a year ago.
Yes, in Dubai,
In Dubai, sorry. And you decided to share the stage with the woman.
Yeah.
And you did something that really, for me, it was inspiring, but also touched my heart. Would you like, because I think this represents another part of how you are an ambassador of Israel. Can you share with us what you did?
So what it was basically following the Abraham Accords. Of course, the idea of having a lot of business between the UAE and Israel was very popular. And Vibe Israel sponsored the first business trip to business conference in Dubai. And we did that because it was such a new opportunity. And I felt that Vibe needed to be there as a people-to-people ambassador. A lot of this happens at the government level. And of course, with a country like the UAE, it remains at government level. But at the same time, I was, a good friend of mine, two good friends of mine put together a WhatsApp group of women who felt that we could sort of connect business women from the UAE and from Israel. And so we started having people-to-people connections. Wow. And it felt to me that Vibe should be there. And so we sponsored the trip. And I part of the sponsorship included standing on stage and saying something. And as a nonprofit and not business oriented, I was trying to figure out what it is that I wanted to say. And my main message was actually a message to the Israeli people, which was the UAE the year before had established a national branding ministry for the UAE. And they do a fabulous job in the UAE and especially Dubai for branding their country and marketing it to the world. And so I wanted to say to Israel, look, they're doing it, we should be doing it as well. So that was my message. But at the same time, I wanted it to be very authentic and natural and real. And so one of the women in this WhatsApp group was a lovely Emirati lady who was fascinated by Israeli food. She had never been to Israel. She had not been to Israel when she received, this invitation to join me on the podium. But she was interested in Jewish food, and she was writing a cookbook called Kosherati, so kosher Emirati, because she just fell in love with the idea and thought it was beautiful. And once the doors opened between Israel and the UAE, she was very excited to come to Israel. She's a businesswoman. She has her own family business, very successful, but she's a foodie. And so that's where we started to connect. And I invited her onto the stage so that two women who are not government representatives, but love their countries and feel that we can bridge the cultural gap and bridge the political gap, could speak. And so I said what I had to say, and then I invited her, and I wanted to give her something, and I didn't know what it was that I could give her on stage. And I remembered on one of the trips that we had done that we had invited, it was a design tour. And there's this wonderful young designer who created a font that combined Arabic and Hebrew in the same words. So they took the word, she took the word like love, and when you read it, you can actually, if you only speak Arabic and if you only speak Hebrew, you can actually read the word, because she combined the two fonts together. And she had created several of these words. And I thought, what a wonderful idea if I could take this beautiful font, which looks very pretty, and frame it and give it as a gift to her, as a sign of sort of a connection. And we looked for the words that she had created, and one of the words was home, bait. And so I basically presented it to her to express, from our home to your home. And really, what is telling a country's story? We're not on our own. It's all about connecting and cultural connections, and how can we together make the world a better place? And then she responded in kind that her entire speech was actually in Hebrew, and she had learned Hebrew in order to make the speech.
Yeah,
really
I heard it. People
very
did.
touching.
Yeah, I think we should put it in the show notes, because it was so. It was amazing. It was simply amazing.
It was it was very exciting. I remember being on the flight, and we were 100 business people. This was the top Israeli business people, and we fly over, the palm of Dubai. And this was the first. It was a private flight, so we landed in the private. It was the first flight into officially into Dubai, and I have a British passport, so I can travel if I want, but I never wanted to travel to a country that wouldn't accept me because of my Israeli passport. And the feeling of landing in a country for the first time ever with an Israeli passport and being superbly welcomed in such a beautiful way, because Arab hospitality is amazing, and feeling so, I get goosebumps now, because I felt I was part of history, and everybody on the plane, like, literally moved to look at the palm, and I felt like the plane was like tilting in a certain direction.
Wow.
But it was just the experience of walking around, and everybody's like, and this is an Arab country. It was, I grew up knowing, okay, yes, we signed peace accords with Egypt and with Jordan, but it's like a cold peace. It's like, we're not really seeking to connect. And here it was like, let's get to know one another. We can help one another. We can interest one another. And I hope that we do a better and better job as time goes by to leverage that desire and interest to both sides benefit. I think there's a lot that can be done there. And actually, one of our tours that we're thinking of doing is to the Emirates, and maybe we would fund bringing Emirati influences to Israel, and maybe they can fund bringing Israeli influences to the Emirates as a sort of cultural bridge between the two countries.
Beautiful. Joanna, I can't thank you enough. I'm sorry, as an Israeli, as a Jewish woman, I can't thank you enough for anything, for all that you're doing for us. I'm serious.
There's no need to thank. If I didn't really love and enjoy what I'm doing, then it would be it's not a sacrifice.
I didn't
really
think
enjoying
so, but
it.
I think you can do what you love. I teach, all the time, wherever I can, but still, people should be appreciated because you had so many other options in your life, and this is what you choose. So
Thank you.
It's our honor, and I think we are all grateful to you. So
you know what, you're doing the same in the end.
Well,
yeah. No, really, in the end, it's all of us doing all of these.
Yeah.
Some of us choose to do it full time. I have the luxury to be able to choose to do it full time.
Yeah.
And some people, amazing business people and cultural people, and who are doing incredible work. We don't necessarily always interact and know about one another. And if there's a way to connect everybody and leverage that, it could be exponential.
I think so.
But we're all part of this story
of building this place, this unusual.
so.
Yeah, Israel.
I think so.
So I'm looking forward, you know, if it's okay, like in few months after I would like to invite you again, so you should
Yep,
share
and
with
look,
us.
everything depends on fundraising and being able to actually create the funding to get it off the ground again. I very much hope that I'll be able to do that. I'll be very disappointed if I won't, but it's not up to me. It's up to donors to decide that they want to support the project. I hope very much, but I'm sure that whether we do, you know, manage to do the tours again, or if it won't be tours, I'll probably end up doing something that is.
I'm sure it's going to be remarkable, but you should know
still
that
in the same place. Yeah.
So in a few months, if it's okay, well, you know,
Absolutely.
It will be lovely.
Thank you. I appreciate
after you've done something. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. תודה רבה.
Thank you. תודה. להתראות בינתיים.
ביי, ליצור.
ביי, להתראות.